Our goal for this series is for each of you to come away just a little bit more informed on a topic of relevance to you and digital marketing, your business, and your career. Today's topic is safeguarding privacy. We have a few experts from our NetPlus team, and they're ready to answer your questions about protecting data and customer privacy. I also want to make sure you know that we are not lawyers. We're not offering legal advice. We're coming at this based on 20 plus years plus more experience in marketing, and we're looking at this as the best practices on the data and consumer communications aspect of this question. So that's really where our answers are going to focus. But if you have legal questions, we certainly would refer you to your legal counsel on those things. As starting, I wanted to introduce you to two people I have a ton of respect for. On my far right here is Jim Del Pizzo. He is a technology director at NetPlus. He comes equipped with a broad knowledge across web technologies, including front and back end programming, and a notable level of expertise across the board in development, SEO, email marketing, and database architecture. He is a proven problem solver. We like to say we can never stump him. We throw stuff at him all the time, and clients are even better at that. And we always manage to figure it out. So when he's not building websites or testing new digital technologies, he can be found, eating and drinking like most of the foodies here at NetPlus, but also taking adorable videos of his son Ryan. And if you friend him on Facebook, you'll see a lot of those, but they are adorable. To my immediate right is Colleen Reese, who is Content Strategy Director here at NetPlus. She is a senior creative and expert content strategist with many, many years of experience. She balances sort of the artistic creative side with data and analytics to develop really high impact content at every scale. Her diverse experience runs the content gamut, including deep roots in B2B, software as a service, and creative leadership across many brands that NetPlus offers. By day, she takes pride in mentoring a creative team of junior talent and stewarding ideas from conception to evolution through optimization, analytics, again, bringing all that to the fore. And by night, she's an ink-toting, gin-slinging urban gardener, often hanging out with her husband, who is a chef, by the way. We're all very jealous. And reading on her couch with her dog Snoop and cat, I don't know how to pronounce it. Majora. Yeah. So that's our team. And you'll see different team members come to the front for other topics. And we're already hard at work on Digital Minute number 2. I hope you'll tune in for social engagement, and you'll see more about that next week. On to our topics. So we're going to kick it off by talking about the state laws, federal laws, and regulations that we should be paying attention to in this climate.
Well, I think first of all, the laws that you have to comply with, even within the United States, are really state by state, and your legal team and definitely your information security team should be fairly intimate with those laws. So how you market and the kinds of data that you're able to collect in a state like California is very different than New York, for example. But internationally, there are also a difference in laws between, the United States, which has historically, in terms of marketing, really complied with what we call CAN-SPAM. And that's, what you see at the bottom of emails that says, if you need to unsubscribe, use this link or update your preference centers. And CAN-SPAM has been, a long-standing governing body in digital marketing for the United States. As many of you are probably aware of, in the past year, the European Union has enacted what is called GDPR. And that has wide implications for privacy concerns and, in general, how people who create digital experiences, whether they be marketers, developers, collect, retain, and manage personal data from both consumers and customers. So this is consumer side on the business-to-business side, and it's not necessarily governing for somebody who is just in the United States and only does business in the United States, but if you do any business in the European Union, you are subject to GDPR, whether it's you have a vendor from the UK, or maybe you have employees who work remotely, or if you have people who buy from your organization who live in the European Union, you're subject to these governing bodies. But GDPR kind of made a big splash, and there's a lot of anticipation for how it still will affect American and North American businesses. And that's, how we got into this big kind of wave of GDPR and privacy concerns. Everyone was writing about what is GDPR, how does it affect me as a marketer, and there's a lot of implications there. And I think the first step, which is something that Robin noted really early on, is really getting connected to your legal team and talking about which of these governing bodies in terms of privacy, whether it is CAN-SPAM or GDPR, applies to your business, and then taking an audit of your privacy culture in your organization. So after you're talking to your legal team, the first step you should be taking is taking a look at what data are you currently collecting, how much of it do you actually use or need, because essentially the more data you have, the higher risk you have in terms of if there's a breach, or even just general privacy from your customers or consumers. So that audit is really a first step. And I think while it's often something that is talked about in legal terms, because this is really kind of like widespread governance, it can start with people who are not necessarily part of your legal team, like a developer or a content producer or a marketing person. These are often the roles that are in charge of determining what data is going to be collected from somebody at what time, how we're going to use it. So the idea that it's just a legal concern is somewhat misguided, because so many people execute on the data that you're collecting and leverage the data that you're collecting. So you really have to kind of assume this privacy by default culture in your organization. So everyone, like, privacy is everyone's responsibility. Privacy is everyone's critical role. And so that's kind of my first takeaway always.
And the audit may uncover some opportunities or challenges. People have legacy systems that are maybe outdated, or they have databases that they have gotten used to using and maybe haven't updated. If the word doesn't come down to them, they won't know.
Yeah, and I would also say I think it's funny, like when GDPR first became, really big in mainstream consciousness, and how like a lot of marketing bloggers and marketers started talking about it. The whole purpose of it was to reduce spam, and I feel like over the weekend I just got like 100 emails from people that I didn't even know had my email address anymore, saying, hey, we've updated our privacy policy, or hey, if you don't do anything, you're not going to be subscribed to this anymore. And it kind of created spam, which was really ironic, but it's also a good illustration of how much it took for marketers to take stock in like who is really using my product and how much data do we have on them. So I think most of us can relate to a scenario where if you do any type of email marketing, like 60% of your list may be lapsed from, especially if it's an older list, like it's more than 5 years old or even more than 2 years old, you're going to have subscribers that are no longer active on your list, and you're still carrying that data, which means you're carrying that risk. And so part of the audit is just getting rid of stuff and dead weight that will hold your general privacy culture down. So get rid of anything that you don't need, including contact information from subscribers who don't engage with your brand anymore.
Yeah, they have no value.
Yeah.
So it's not just the email side of it. I've seen a lot of websites now. As soon as you go to the website, you'll get a little cookie alert that says, we are now collecting this cookie data and explaining what they're doing with that cookie data. So that's one other part of the GDPR, is actually telling the users why you're collecting the data and what you're going to use it for.
Yeah, I think historically we used to be able to do things like make very loose translations between opt-ins. So like if you had an email address and they happened to give you a phone number, you had that marketing permission to like send them a text message. With GDPR, and again, while it's not necessarily something that is governing businesses in the United States and is very specific to the European Union, most people are saying like, okay, if this is the first wave, the second wave is coming and it will probably land here as well. And so one of the primary takeaways from GDPR and one of the biggest summations that, I have as a marketer is this idea of like explicit consent to marketing that's specific to the type of communications that you're doing. So you can't say opt in to receive marketing messages anymore. You have to say opt in to receive texts from us, opt in to receive emails from us, and almost to some extent like the level of frequency that you're going to be doing that. So like if you're giving a monthly newsletter, you should probably explicitly communicate that it's monthly, especially if you share that data with any advertisers or partners or vendors. So if the data that you're collecting is like an email address or a cookie, and you're going to share that with third-party advertisers, that now needs to be explicitly communicated as well. So you're not just collecting the data for yourself, you're collecting it for others, and people need to know that.
So what I'm hearing is, it's, and it's a global economy, and we all need to be concerned about changes in expectations and consumer communications over time, and that, that audit is really important. All right, so let's move on to specifically the data collection. We covered some of this, but there are some marketing best practices for how to ask for personal info online and what to ask for.
So not even just what to ask for, but actually being able to edit and change and get out of that easily.
Yeah.
So a preference center is great to have. So if I signed up for XYZ, I should be able to go to X, Y, and Z and say, let me change my name, let me change my address, let me get rid of this so I don't get this information anymore. So that is key for the GDPR, to be able to edit and change that information.
So giving consumers control.
Yes.
Yeah, so they need to be able to revoke permission fairly easily without, having to jump through hoops. If somebody has to call you 3 times to get removed from a magazine, or, it's kind of like an old adage, like you could call the magazine 800 times and say, stop sending these to my house.
Right.
And what we're finding is a really similar experience in digital. And so they have to be able to revoke and completely remove that record from your database, and they have to be able to edit it. In terms of collecting the data, like the actual, mustering of customer data. Mustering. I think that GDPR and a lot of these privacy concerns are really more so an opportunity for marketers. And so much of what we're talking about being kind of the new mandatory for marketers is really just to be a good strategic marketer. So when we think about taking an audit of the customer data that you have, and then what data should you be collecting moving forward, to me, that's just good marketing. So being a good strategic marketer means that there should be a very detailed plan for, this is the information that is absolutely critical for our business in order to, send the right messages or even to make money. And if the data that you're collecting exceeds that even first kind of litmus test, you've made a critical error, which is that your data collection is really more about you than it is about a consumer or a person at the other end of the line. In general, I think a lot of this stems from the literature of our discipline, which says, make it personalized, find the right content and the right people. And we did this more is more thing where we were like, we're going to collect all of the data and we're going to have all of the data. And we started to rely on personal data to optimize marketing and to optimize content. And I think that GDPR and privacy are a great opportunity for marketers to better innovate and become more strategic. Because if you have a plan that says, upon entry, this is the data that we're going to collect, here's how we're going to manage it, here's exactly how we're going to leverage it, you're essentially creating a content marketing plan through the lens of privacy.
Anyway, we were talking about customers, and Colleen was making some really, eloquent and critical points about being customer-centric, and I think that puts marketers on notice, because we now essentially have to provide a benefit for customers. There has to be a reason for them to give you the information and to retain it and to use it, and that makes us all the more mindful about collecting and using what data points we have available to us.
Yeah. I think I've heard a funny joke, which is like that GDPR is really the first time that as marketers we really had to consider privacy, because the general gist of can spam was like, you can spam.
Yeah.
Just a nerdy marketing joke for you.
Or
You
maybe
know,
not.
otherwise, take stock of what you have, remove what you don't. And I think so much of this is related to being customer centric, but you can also apply a lot of UX principles to this as well. So, when GDPR really became a thing, that email that we were joking about was essentially a link to a privacy policy, which we've already learned few users are going to read. And there's this UX principle, which is essentially like use real world examples of things rather than, use industry jargon or something that's overly complicated. So the idea is if you're talking about money, use a money icon because you can build recognition that way. It doesn't put the burden on the user to understand what you're talking about. And I think that really applies to copy and language in terms of how we're talking about privacy. So when you send a customer something like a privacy policy as a way to communicate a major shift in your organization, you're not really using a real world example. You're not giving them something that's really that useful. And so what is useful is really explicit and clear and concise microcopy. So the content that appears in a form, the content that appears on an error page or in a preference center, those are major opportunities to clearly communicate privacy policies that are real world and much more easy to understand than something like a huge legal document is for your customers who are just not going to read it. Like I didn't read a single one that came up, and I'm not a typical user. Like I'll read a lot because I work in digital, but I won't read a
No.
Yeah.
Another good real world tip is potentially, when you're setting up your customers, set yourself up first. Go through the experience and ask yourself, whatever the benefit is, the cost benefit is to you as an individual, would you give up that piece of information and allow it to be stored and used? So, go through that yourself, and then on the organizational side, weigh the risk benefit of collecting all that info, and at the same time input some dummy test accounts so that you can can verify what their experience actually is, and hopefully short circuit any concerns you might have over how that data is being used.
Yeah. I also think that the ability and a prominent space for feedback can't be understated at this stage. So giving users and customers the opportunity to tell you that either something is unclear or is maybe a way of, if you're explaining how they're using their data and they're uncomfortable with it, having the opportunity to express that directly is really important at this stage. Or even just like, should everything be required or should it not? And they'll give you that behaviorally if you're not converting and your forms are not completing. But having an area for feedback like a preference center, or even just a box that says, is this good? Are we communicating on the same level is really important.
So the other piece of this is not just what you collect; it's how you secure the data. And even if you're not in a regulated industry, even if you're not capturing financial or health information, you still need to be cognizant that this information could be at risk, and there are plenty of hackers and bad actors out there who are looking to steal data, even if it doesn't include a social security number or credit card number or health information, because they're going to put that together with other pieces of information that they have acquired to compromise your customers. So security is really key.
So with security, most of you've all noticed Google's making everyone move to secure servers, so HTTPS for everyone. That was one of Google's steps. Another thing that everyone should be doing is encrypting your database password files, so using either a hash or an encryption key. Not everyone will know that, but your IT people should know that and have that done. Another thing that's very intriguing is actually blockchain and that's actually going to be a future digital minute, I believe, right? And that technology is going to help us store data in a more secure way where only two people have access in or out, the user itself, and then the organization to get the data and use it. So that way, hackers can't get in and steal that data. So those few ways are good to store data.
Good. All right. All right, hopefully you're all still on. So we've talked about giving consumers choice, providing them a place to update their preferences, and maybe even communicate any complaints that they have. Because the worst case scenario is that you don't hear from them; they just drop out of your customer funnel, and that's not what you want. If there's a concern, you can be sure that of those voicing it, there's another 100 that have that concern but haven't voiced it. So it's better to hear it, be able to respond to it, act on it, and collect any concerns or complaints that you have. All right. Are there any common practices that used to be okay, but now are not?
So one big one is you used to be able to just go out and buy lists with user data. Don't do that anymore. I was never a big fan of it when you could do it, but now it's even worse. So no more buying data, no more buying users. You have to get it organically.
Yeah, I used to be able to merge purge and say, I have this list and you have this list, and let's see what data is missing between the two of them. And I agree, it was always a questionable process, but it was fairly productive back in the day. Again, it was mentioned earlier, but your opt-in to marketing is specific to the way that you're going to use that. So you can no longer say that because I have a phone number, I have the ability to communicate with that person via text or to call them. And an opt-in for an email does not equal an opt-in for, text alerts. Facebook recently, so this has a lot of broad-reaching implications on social media. So some practices that we used to have on Facebook was that we were able to leverage a lot of third-party data within Facebook's advertising program. So we were able to, the Facebook was the buyer of the data, we just used it, but you used to be able to have things like purchasing history and a lot from credit cards and cell phone use, and we used to be able to target based on those purchasing histories, and a lot of that data is no longer available, and we're not able to use it for marketing. And I think, again, that's just going to mean that we have to be smarter marketers rather than rely on all of these data brokers to give us the targeting that we need. So that's one that you can no longer do that used to be accepted.
All right. So, we've talked a lot about the need for a privacy policy and an updated privacy policy based on the unique concerns and challenges of your organization and your customers. We've also chatted about that it's not really strictly a legal thing. There are other stakeholders involved. So let's talk about that. Like, who needs to be, in that conversation when you are adopting or changing a policy?
Sure. I think that while the legal team should absolutely be the people who are authoring and reviewing the privacy policy, they will need input and consultation from your marketing and technology teams, because those are the people that are going to be able to communicate to lawyers how a product is used, how marketing is created, how it's managed, what data we currently have, what we can anticipate having later. And then very specifically, some behaviors that may need to be examined further, online, like did you used to use cookies on your website in order to fulfill impressions for an advertiser, or did you use it in order to fuel your own marketing? So absolutely, your marketing and technology and content team should have a seat at that table and discuss it. But when it comes to putting pen to paper, that's the lawyers.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
You did good, Colleen.
Having that cross-functional team is really key, because people are going to come with their own set of perspective and their own concerns. So they bring those to the table.
Yeah.
That allows everybody to address them.
Yeah, and I would just add that like nothing can replace a real conversation with your customers and users. What are they concerned about? How do they use your product in a way that maybe you don't anticipate or always remember? There's always a million unique use cases for any website, for any experience, and so when you get into this conversation about privacy policy, it could probably be a great time to get on the phone with the customer and say, hey, this is what you've given us. Are you worried about any of this? Is there any of this that, what can we do to make you feel like a little bit safer about how we manage your data? And that could be a really great way to make a privacy policy very useful.
Mhm. I mean, I'm hearing all this and it's great, but my thought goes back to the hearings with Zuckerberg and him talking about, when he built Facebook, privacy wasn't in his mind. It was just connecting people and connecting their stuff and what they liked. And that's kind of where my privacy. So they could have all been at the table, but they didn't think that far ahead.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things I have to be worried about is the technology is moving so fast and creating stuff. I mean, there's smartphones, smart watches, smart homes now. I was telling Robin and Colleen earlier, I just got a new sleep apnea machine that has its own modem that sends all the data to my doctor every night.
Yeah.
So it's kind of weird to have all this data moving so fast that some of the privacy policies are slow to keep up with those things moving so fast.
It's also additive because, 10 years ago or 15 years ago when privacy policies became necessary, they didn't have to cover so much. We didn't have so many interconnected relationships. Now we all have multiple social media accounts on multiple channels. We're connected to e-commerce vendors and data suppliers and buyers and sellers of data. It's not a simple thing anymore. It's its own data ecosystem that has to be managed. Whereas before, if you had one-on-one with just Facebook or just pick a vendor, you could make discrete decisions about how you want to do that. But now you have to think about what your data profile in the cloud is, and who's connecting the various disparate pieces, and what are they putting together? What's that picture of you as a consumer that they're putting together? And what is, if you're on the organizational side, what is your role in helping that picture come together?
Well, that was the old buzzword, big data, right?
Yeah.
Oh, we have all the big data, now what we're
Yeah.
doing with it.
Yeah. I think even to Robin's first question, like what are federal and state laws when the internet, which is a decentralized mechanism, is coming into question, like how do we even enforce state laws when your server could be in Nevada and you're operating out of New Jersey? How do you approach privacy in a way that's decentralized geographically and also decentralized in terms of use and privacy? So like we use OAuth all the time. Like you're going to use your Facebook login or your Google login or your Twitter login to get to a new application. Like you can use your LinkedIn to submit a resume. And so then who is then beholden to that customer's data? Is it LinkedIn or is it the organization that's accepting the resume? Is it you or is it the data storage center in Nevada? And how do we build regulations that are not necessarily so cumbersome that everyone's adhering to the same rules, but making sure that there aren't all these back doors for your privacy to get lost?
Wait, you said the server's in Nevada. I thought it was a cloud, so it's just all up here. So.
Yeah, that's true.
Or in some, distant international location. Yeah.
And then you throw in CDN, so my server might be in Nevada, Chicago, and Texas. So it's in 3 places. So you need 3 states.
What is the CDN?
It's a content delivery system, so we can have servers in different places that replicate the same thing. So in case one goes down or the load gets heavy here, it will pop to the next one, next one, next one.
Yeah. So you're everywhere, people. You're everywhere, and we know all about you, which is a good thing. So digital policy, absolutely a must, and it's also not a one and done kind of deal. Things change all the time, including your organization's mission and how you're planning to use that data. So your privacy policy and practices have to keep up, which means you need to track compliance, you need to track data usage, you need to stay on top of all of that.
Yeah.
Okay. So some ideas for safeguarding against external risks, internal risks. How do people reduce their risk profile with data?
So are you talking more of the user protecting their information or
I think both.
us as,
Or
marketers?
as marketers, I think.
So,
We'll go the other way.
Okay, so as I was talking about, encrypting your database, making sure only, certain people have access to it. I know here we have a super admin who has access to just the users table, but we can't see any of their passwords. So we can't get in anyone's accounts or change any of their information. That's one thing, but then you have to go a step further in saying where we're keeping all this information. Do we keep it in one siloed place where we have like the lock and key, or is it in multiple places? I would recommend one place to have all the stuff. So it's one place where, all that is, instead of having 300 little places where it's a lot easier to get into. So most people go with a CRM system that stores all that data. Uh, and we were talking earlier about blockchain, and I think that is going to be the future of marketing. The more research I do into it, and that's where most things are going to be stored. I could see, and I've seen these bigger companies come in and start their own blockchain internally to store this data. One of the biggest, not biggest, but one of the ones I've seen is more Wayfair. They're less of a online e-commerce package right now. They're doing more blockchain work than a lot of other these companies. So they're trying to be the forefront of, storing that data.
For me, and I'll I'll say it probably a million times within the remainder of the hour. It's just about taking what you need, and the less superfluous data that you have, the less you need to safeguard, and the more focused you can be in the type of data that you have and how to specifically protect it. So considerations for financial data is very different than, do you have some primary use in their job function? So really putting a critical eye to what is the data that you absolutely need versus what is the data that is a nice to have, and getting rid of anything that's a nice to have, because it's just carrying risk.
Yeah, and to add to that, transparency for the user.
Yeah.
Saying this is why we have your information, this is what we're going to use it for.
Including external partners, because nobody, we're not talking one-to-one with consumers, off on their own right now. We're doing that through, cooperative relationships, data purchases or sharing. There's a lot of external people involved in any kind of marketing effort that uses customer data, and you have to be willing and able to review their policies as well and determine if you're comfortable with how they're storing and using the data that they're going to be collecting on your behalf.
For sure.
And that's a responsibility to your customers. So let's talk about that worst case scenario. You have a data breach. What's the first thing you do, and how do you avoid it? Well, maybe we should flip those. How do you avoid it, and then what do you do if it happens?
I mean, I don't think it's super likely that we're going to see like fewer data breaches as a result of GDPR. It's one of those things where I think it's going to continue to happen, which is super unfortunate, just based on the fact that it exists. Like, there's that adage, like, the invention of the ship is the invention of shipwreck. So, like, the fact that you're collecting customer data and that we all as marketers are, collecting data, breaches are going to happen, and that's just kind of the fact of life.
And it's not just breaches. You can have a disgruntled employee, like the CIA with Snowden, and just saying, "Oh, here's all the stuff that we have," and now it's out there.
Yeah.
Okay. So you have to monitor, obviously, and react very quickly. There's a PR component to it potentially if it's a public breach.
Yeah, I mean, you'll in most cases be legally required to communicate that a breach has occurred. In most instances, this is like what we're thinking about with like Target and all that stuff that happened with their credit card information. Your legal team will tell you that you are required to let people know that there has been a breach. It's also just good, transparent communication to say it anyway. And I think proactive communication is really key here. I think that's definitely absolutely a PR consideration. there's no small investment in privacy. If you want to get it right and you want to succeed, investing in technology that is going to safeguard data and investing in the right solutions based on your industry, whether it's finance or healthcare or, those are already highly regulated and they're already investing quite a lot in protecting their customers or patients' data. But I think that investment will increase over time as data becomes more readily available and readily brokered. And so it absolutely needs to be a consideration in annual planning, 100%.
And it's best case also to have a plan for that breach,
totally.
so that when it happens, you don't have to spend the next 24 hours figuring out what to do. There should be a step-by-step plan with practice, and everybody knows, this is go time. This is what your role is, my role is, her role is, his role is. Everybody knows immediately what steps to take to limit the damage.
Yeah, it's almost like writing an obit for a celebrity before they pass. I would write your privacy obit
or fire drill.
I mean, we have it for website. When websites go down, we have our checklist of how to get it back up the quickest way, and then test what happened and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now I'm starting to think: is there data breach insurance you can start buying?
I'm sure there
it'll
is. Yeah.
exist if it doesn't.
Yeah.
Or should I not said that out loud so we can start it ourselves?
It's definitely a drill. Okay. So transparent and fast communication, good PR support, and also just when in reacting to any of this, it's going to be your nature to do it from the organizational risk perspective. But the question you should be asking yourself is, what does this mean to my customer? And put their needs first. So doing it from their perspective and putting their needs first will help you with all the other aspects, especially PR.
Before you go on to the next question, I have a question.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yes, I'm shaking things up. Do you think privacy is changing from generation to generation? So my grandparents' idea of privacy, do you think it's going to be different than, say, my son's idea of privacy on the internet?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So
as we change, we're going to be changing the privacy.
It's a pendulum, and I think it's already swung out to one extreme, and in my opinion, I think it's swinging back a little bit.
Okay.
I think what technology people use and this over documentation of your life and in general, I was reading something the other day that says you appear on camera, on average, about 11 times a day, just going about your business and walking around. If you go into, we're on camera in this building, I was on camera when I walked by a street lamp. And so there are forces that are external to our control, but within the consumer's control and within us as human beings, everything that we're using is changing and it's introducing new behaviors. Instagram introduced self-surveillance, not to get too conspiracy.
Yeah. Well, I'm starting to think of Minority Report, where you're walking down the street, it scans your eye and it shows you the advertisement.
Personal
yeah. And what you consider to be private is very different than it was 20 years ago. I think the value of privacy to another person is never going to change. Everyone wants to feel safe and alone sometimes in private, but what we consider to be private is really going to change. At one point, your dinner used to be private.
And now we're sharing it ourselves.
What you ate for dinner was a private conversation between you and your family.
So one question is, are there good resources I can use to keep up with standards and requirements?
Yeah, I use, mine are really specific to content, so I use Content Marketing Institute a lot. Privacy specifically, I feel like I see a lot of great pieces on things like Wired. TechCrunch. Yep. Yeah.
Mashable.
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
Sorry,
I'm not reading from your page.
No, it's okay. Those are the places that I typically go. The reporting is really solid, and it always has, both a business and a kind of human lens through it. So I found it to be really kind of balanced when we're talking about privacy.
Great. Anything else you guys want to cover on this topic?
No, I think just in general, I think viewing privacy less as kind of its own discipline and more as something that should be considered with by everybody at every stage is my real takeaway. And just knowing that like privacy is it's good branding, it's good experience, and it's good business practice.
Well, on that note, I'm going to say thank you to all our participants for spending this hour with us on this topic. We have a wonderful new digital minute coming up. We'll send you the dates. They are in mid-October, and the topic is going to be driving social engagement. So we're going to have some new experts on that panel, and we're going to be showing you some examples and talking about how to drive that engagement. And we hope you'll be able to join us for that one as well. And if you have any other questions on this topic or on the social engagement topic, I hope you'll reach out to me. I can be found at rn@netplus.agency. And again, I want to thank you for spending this time with us. Thank you.